Good morning. It's good morning those who are here and connected online. I'm very pleased to start today and continue our discussion on innovations in education. Well, and I'm sure that there were really inspiring discussions yesterday, and you also had a chance to listen to very, very interesting and exciting presentations, and there were quite a lot of them. So I'm very pleased that today to present our next panelists and the key speaker, Anthony Camilleri. Hello, good morning, Anthony. And his presentation and his speech today is getting ready for the new abnormal innovations to support a lifelong learning life cycles. Well, and just a few words to introduce Anthony, that he's a senior partner at the Knowledge Innovation Center. He has worked for the last 10 years as a consultant and also expert in the field of innovations. Bet jis yra. Okay. Now it should be okay. Can you hear now?
Perfectly, thank you.
Great, finally. Sorry, Anthony, it was quite now the presentation of you personally and your speech. Maybe I will not repeat so a long one, just to say that Anthony has been working for the last 10 years in the field of educational innovations at the Knowledge Innovation Center, also as consultant to numerous international organizations, including European Commission, UNESCO, Asian Development Bank, and so on. So I'm pleased to now to invite you to present your speech, and after we will plan that we will have around maybe 45 minutes for your presentation, to have maybe some 10 minutes for raising questions and discussing. So Anthony, the floor is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm really sorry I couldn't be with you there in person. What I'm going to talk to you today about is essentially flexibilization of the education system, and how a lot of different initiatives around Europe at the moment are coming together to, let's say, try and adapt our educational systems to a new future. Before diving into the details, I think it's always useful to zoom out and understand the context in which our educational systems are operating. And if you look into If you look into what's happening at the moment, I would say that there are 6 trends which are particularly important in understanding the educational system at the moment. First of all, we are looking at a time of unprecedented social turmoil, or at least unprecedented for the last couple of decades. We're seeing massive developments in technology at also a rate that is pretty much unprecedented in human history. The idea of jobs for life is becoming more and more of a myth. Employers demand more flexibility, they demand more reaction times. Our entire employment system is slowly moving towards a skills base rather than a qualifications base. And all of this is actually creating a set of twin trends, while on the one hand you have the decrease in value of some degrees, while at the other hand you have the phenomenon of degree inflation. So to dive into these megatrends just a little bit, first thing I would like to convince you of is that there is no such thing as the new normal. So we've been hearing this phrase a lot around a lot of different conferences, but if you just look at 2022, these are some of the pictures you will have seen on the news. So this is China this week, still under lockdown in many, many cities. If we look in the world of politics, you may have caught this on the news this week, which I'm just taking as one of many, many examples of increased turmoil and increased polarization in politics, not just in the UK, but across the world. Winter is coming, and we are hearing quite a bit about the energy crisis and trying to figure out how we're going to stay warm this winter, while at the same time, if we look towards the summer, last summer was an absolute record in terms of climate change and warming of the environment. And this is just 2022. If we look at it in terms of technological developments, a couple of more things you may have caught this year. First of all, you may have caught this one where Google AIs have gotten so good that they essentially are passing the Turing test and at least fooling some people into thinking they're actually sentient. You may also have caught this one, where Google's DeepMind predicted the 3D structure of nearly every protein known to science. To give you an idea how momentous this is, in 1957, it took a researcher 22 years to predict the structure of a single protein. In 2022, an artificial intelligence predicted the structure of 200 million proteins in a space of a few months. So if you just look at this, this is an absolutely exponential growth in technology. So you take all of this together, and as I said, what I'd like to convince you of is that there's no such thing as the new normal. What there is the new change, the new abnormal. And how are we reacting to it as people, as companies, as educational systems? The first big reaction you will see is the Great Resignation. And the Great Resignation is this phenomenon we have been seeing after COVID, where essentially people are rethinking their lives, thinking it's time to not just get a better job, but to get a different job. Not only are we seeing spikes in resignations and in rehirings, what we're also seeing is a large increase in the number of people who are choosing not just to change occupation, but to change occupational category entirely. Some statistics from the United States indicate that nearly half of people who have resigned in the last year actually are changing occupational category entirely. You take this from the perspective of employers, and what the forecasting studies say is that between 20 and 2025, in response to all of this, 40% of the core skills which employees have will change. So that's a 40% change in effectively knowledge and skills you will need to continue doing your job. Because of this, they also expect that 40% of workers will require reskilling of 6 months or less to be able to adapt to this. But also, they expect that 85 million jobs will essentially disappear and be replaced by computers, while at the same time, 97 million entirely new jobs will be created in new occupational categories, new jobs that didn't exist before as a result of our new connections with technology. So again, you put all this together and what we are seeing is a lot of turmoil, a lot of change in our systems at unprecedented rates. As educational systems, what is our response to this? And first and foremost, if you look at the statistics in higher education, what we see is a slow and continuing gradual increase in the number of degrees or the percentage of people getting degrees from higher education across the years. This is this orange line that you see in the graph. And as you can see, the tertiary education attainment of the European population continues to slowly increase. So one of the things we are doing is indeed just studying for longer, getting more degrees. At the same time, however, there are a number of, let's say, emerging indicators that tend to show that degrees are not necessarily as important as they used to be in all areas. So this graph is from the Emerging Degree Research Report from Burning Glass. And what you see here is the percentage of job calls that actually require a degree from different companies. So for example, only 11% of computer support specialists at Amazon now require a degree. If you look at Accenture is above average. It doesn't usually require a degree for most of its high-level roles. IBM also is doing this more and more. Now, we're not saying that they don't hire people with degrees, but what we are saying is that they are increasingly becoming open to people bringing in their skills from different sources. Furthermore, in the last decade, we've heard a lot about degree inflation, and the idea of degree inflation is that a job that previously required a bachelor's degree would now require a master's degree, and that essentially people were being expected to upskill more and more. But what we are beginning to see now is a reversal of that trend as well. So one of the things we're beginning to see is as the unemployment rate has been decreasing, employers have been becoming more flexible in terms of their entry requirements for work. The reason for this is simply that if they set artificially high standards to be able to get their employees, they're unable to find them. And what we're seeing here in this graph is that the education requirement in terms of share of positions requiring higher than bachelors is slowly decreasing since 2012, with quite a sharp dip as the unemployment rate decreased after the pandemic. So again, what we're seeing here is essentially employers becoming more flexible in terms of what they will accept, what type of candidates they will consider. This flexibility also pours into other parts of the educational system. So the growth of MOOCs, again, has just been linearly increasing every year. And the number of courses offered at MOOCs just keeps on increasing every year. If we look at this in terms of students, last year, 220 million students completed MOOCs from 950 universities. And what this really shows is that, let's say, a massive increase and interest in alternative forms of getting tertiary education. So some people, and you will read a lot of think pieces that would say this, would argue that the value of degrees and qualifications is decreasing, new models of higher education are thriving, and that this is the end of traditional education and degrees. Now, I would argue that might be a little bit oversold. What we're really seeing is that we are seeing people increasingly respond to uncertain times. And the response to uncertain times needs to translate into an increased choice of educational opportunities and an increased choice in careers. It means increased flexibility in both your educational pathways and in your career pathways. It also means increased flexibility in provision methods, more learning from home, and so on and so forth. And it also implies increased guidance being made available to be able to navigate all these new opportunities. So what I would argue is that what we're actually seeing is not the end of traditional educational degrees, but rather we're seeing the emergence of a new micro-credential reality, and where we're seeing micro-credentials powering a more flexible model of education, and where they're used for very many different purposes, where they're being used on the one hand for independent learning, like is the case for most of the MOOC models, where micro-credentials are actually the building blocks to make up qualifications, and where micro-credentials are often used for, let's say, continuing professional education, where they're used to complement existing education, existing base education received at a university. The simple idea I would therefore like to share with you is that as we move forward, and if we think about things in a lifelong learning perspective, we need to start thinking more of people collecting a set of educational experiences over a lifetime. They may be bundled into a full-time degree, they may be in a part-time degree, they may be taken as MOOCs at different points in one person's life. There'll be lots and lots of different combinations of how this is. And the simple idea I'd like to propose to you is essentially that micro-credentials should become the default base unit of learning, and that everything ends up being stacked based on these. Now, there are a couple of implications which we'll get into later in the presentation if you accept this proposition. First of all, if we start talking about people possessing micro-credentials rather than just possessing degrees, and if they possess a degree is nothing more than a collection of micro-credentials, this means a 100-fold increase in the volume of data that is generated and gathered about student achievement. The corollary to that is that if we are gathering all this data and we want to use this data for recognition purposes, if students are going around with 100 times more data, then only automatic or semi-automatic recognition becomes feasible. And again, this is something we'll get into in the coming slides. So within all of this dynamic environment, what has the response of Europe been? And the response of Europe in regards to this flexibilization agenda can best be found in a recommendation to the Council that was issued in March last year on the European approach to micro-credentials. The European approach talks about a few different things. First and foremost, it talks about a definition of a micro-credential. And although a lot of time has been spent trying to define micro-credentials in the last 2 or 3 years, what we end up with is actually a very, very simple definition, where a micro-credential essentially is a record of learning following a small volume of learning. So in the end, all of the fuss effectively is by saying, look, we need to divide learning into smaller units. And that's essentially the definition that we're working with. This said, key features of micro-credentials are modularity, in other words, that you do find them in distinct units. There's stackability, which means you can build them into anything from a MicroMasters to a full degree. It means that they are portable, which means a student can use these micro-credentials and take them to another educational institution, take them to an employer, etc., etc. Digital, primarily micro-credentials. The certificates are digital records of achievement, and micro-credentials should be universally recognized and universally understood. So the key message I would say you want to take away from here is that micro-credentials essentially describe a system of interoperable educational building blocks. And one of the key words here is this word interoperability, which we'll be coming back to more and more in the coming slides. So if we look at the recommendation, The recommendation encourages member states to support the quality and transparency of micro-credentials. And to support the quality and transparency of micro-credentials, it makes a few suggestions. These suggestions are essentially suggestions to member states, but actually implementing them is one of the challenges we will be having in the next few years. So the first recommendation they make is apply, adapt, and develop quality assurance mechanisms for micro-credentials. So if we think about that and say, okay, how will quality assurance of a micro-credential work? We need to compare it, first of all, with a degree. A degree tends to be offered by a well-known university. It tends to be a known quantity. And because, let's say, it's this large unit that hundreds of students will often have done, that they take 3 to 5 years to take, it's a known quantity. And apart from the formal procedures of accreditation and so on, there's also, let's say, a lot of informal capital that goes into the reputation of that degree. With a much, much smaller micro-credential, creating that type of, let's say, reputational quality becomes much more challenging. And if you actually think about all of the different sources of trust that go into a micro-credential, you end up with quite a large list. So if you think about, for example, the QA procedures applied to micro-credentials. So the QA procedures could include accreditation procedures against European standards and guidelines or against national accreditation standards. The micro-credential might be published on a platform such as the European MOOC Consortium platform or the Coursera or the edX platform, and it may have gone through a set of quality certifications to be able to be published on that platform. You also have the normal type of, let's say, more content-oriented course quality assurance, and that is based around the expertise of the evaluators. Depending, just for, let's say, these QA procedures applied, if you think about where can I find information about this data? On European standards and guidelines, it might be the DECAR database that's operated by the Quality Assurance Register. You might have national databases for accreditation standards. For QA eligibility policies, you would need to check the platform lists of the platforms, Coursera, edX, etc. To check the expertise of the evaluators, I would need to look into their LinkedIn profiles, their Scholar profiles, etc., etc. The next part is institutional reputation. And your institutional reputation is basically made up of two things. First of all, it's the ranking or labeling initiatives you're a member of. So I don't want to get into, let's say, a long discussion of is ranking better, is labeling initiatives better. But the point is, many third-party organizations create lists of universities where they list those universities or programs by varying sets of quality criteria. And every one of those lists tells you something about the quality of the institution. So examples, again, of databases that have this information, you have multi-rank, you have the Pearson Times Higher Education ranking, you have the QS ranking, etc., etc. Also, your institutional reputation depends on the networks you are a member of and the membership lists of those networks. That is, although the trust in a micro-credential, also the quality of a micro-credential also depends on employer demand. And employer demand is a factor of the demand for skills in that micro-credential, which you might find in a skills forecast. It might depend on how many employers are specifically requesting those skills, which you might find from job postings, and it might be determined from the presence of those micro-credentials in, let's say, preset learning pathways or badging pathways and so on, which again, you can find from published learning pathways. Two more elements here, recognition history, and the recognition history is basically a record of which other universities have recognized this micro-credential for the purpose of credit, which at the moment, at least, there is no data source for. And lastly, student feedback. And student feedback is a factor of student ratings, which are sometimes published with the micro-credentials, and student performance, which could be changes in jobs linked to that micro-credential. You put it all together and you see that actually, let's say, the amount of information you have to process to get a comprehensive look at the quality of a micro-credential is quite exhaustive. And I would say there's no service in the world at the moment that manages to do all of this. But if you look around the internet, you can see certain parts of this already happening. So, for example, I just pulled this off Coursera this morning. If you look at a course on Coursera, you'll find that they include some of these quality indicators to tell you what it's about. So you see that you will have the student rating, telling you what other students who already did it thought. You also see that there's a form of rating of the instructor providing the course. You also find that they actually provide information about employer demand for the skills in this course, and they provide some information on the student performance, saying that they've actually done the surveys and find that 3/4 of graduates from this course report an improvement in their career trajectory. So this is one example of actually linking, let's say, these different data sets into an actual course catalog to give information to students. Another example is from studyportals.eu, which is a directory of short courses you can find. And here on the website, again, when they list the universities, if you go into, let's say, a category for computer science and IT on their portal, they will also show you the rankings according to various different rankings of the universities that are actually offering courses on their platform. Taking another approach to this, if we look at more formal accreditations, the DECAR initiative in Europe is, I think, the first idea of a truly open database that has records of which institutions have been accredited according to the European standards and guidelines for higher education and which ones haven't. One of the really innovative things, though, about this register isn't that they just published a register. It's that they have made it available via APIs, and because it's made available via APIs, it can be connected to by different services. And you see that this data is already used by all kinds of different services which actually connect to it to automatically retrieve the accreditation status of an institution or a program. They also do one more thing, which if you look at their records, you see that they actually issue the accreditations to institutions as verifiable credentials in and of themselves. So I don't just have to trust the register, but actually I can go to, let's say, the institution's website and actually download a computer readable, verifiable credential to check their accreditation status directly from them if I so choose to do so. One more example of talking about, let's say, platform lists. EADTU runs something called the Open Up Ed Quality Label, and the Open Up Ed Quality Label establishes, let's say, a set of quality criteria for micro-credentials. Again, if I go onto the Open Up Ed portal, I can see a list of courses that comply with the requirements of that quality label. So all of these are kind of examples of how quality information can be brought together to help inform student choice, increase transparency, etc., etc. But there still remains a lot of challenges in this area. First of all, quality certifications, despite the example I showed you from DECAR, are generally not awarded as digital labels. Quality certifications to institutions are usually a piece of paper that is on the wall of the rector somewhere and which you have no way of accessing digitally. Similarly, all the trust information, which I was showing on the first slide, generally, in most cases, this is not available to be shared using common open data standards. So even though all this information exists, it can't necessarily be accessed, it can't necessarily be processed, it can't necessarily be used. And sure enough, because of this, course directories tend to aggregate little, if any, information from external services. So the example I showed you of quality data integrated into Coursera, for example, did show some interesting information to students, but it was only showing information which Coursera had itself gathered. It wasn't integrating with third-party services to understand the context of this course in the wider world. And that's, let's say, one of the challenges which we need to address. The second place where the Commission recommendation tells us to look at for quality and transparency of micro-credentials is by supporting the use of skills intelligence system to analyze labor market needs. And again, the skills intelligence thing is something you will have heard a lot about in the last years. Now, skills intelligence has a habit of being devilishly complicated, because at the heart of skills intelligence is a skill taxonomy. And the skill taxonomy is a fancy word for a list of skills. But creating a list of skills that is usable can be very, very difficult. First of all, because we have lots of different sources for skills data. So first of all, on the left, you have educational course learning outcomes, the learning outcomes that are attached to all the catalogs. And those might be as part of structured frameworks where you really have, let's say, a set of learning outcomes, which is compared to level indicators and the courses, let's say, tagged with that. Or they can be what you might call an inferred taxonomy, where the learning outcome formulation is more free, but if you look at those learning outcomes, you can still understand that they provide certain skills. The second area you might look at is occupational standards and frameworks. And there are a number of occupational skills and frameworks. There's IT skills frameworks, there's green skills frameworks, there's various healthcare skills frameworks. And again, this is another source of skills data. You then have employers that create their own skills taxonomies, and creating, let's say, your own employer skill taxonomy is more and more a feature of talent management systems that are used especially by large corporations. And when they use these, they may have quite strict structured taxonomies of skills for their employees. On the other hand, they might not have it so structured, and they get similarly to the way learning outcomes can be inferred from courses. They may have inferred taxonomies where their job calls just require people with certain skills, and you can kind of infer the framework from their job calls. Then on the right-hand side, you have the open purpose taxonomies. You have ESCO, the European Classification of Skills and Occupations, which essentially is a giant list of thousands of skills, which can be mapped to any course or any occupation. And you have various commercial versions of this service as well. So LinkedIn, Workday, Burning Glass all sell skill taxonomies as a service to employers who are looking to build these types of tools. So when you have all of these skill taxonomies there, and if you say, okay, I want to build services based on these skills, I want to build a skills matching service, I want to build a course recommender, I want to build other types of automated guidance services. First thing you need to do is understand the skills and the relations between them in here. And if you, to illustrate the challenge, you might have a basic skill like advanced Excel. Your system needs to know that advanced Excel mentioned, for example, in your diploma supplement is the same as expert in Microsoft spreadsheet, which maybe an employer was asking for in a job call. Ideally, your system should also know that even though neither of these has mentioned Google Sheets, if you know Excel, you're likely to be able to use Google Sheets as well. Apart from this, though, then, there's a whole bunch of other skills that are kind of inherent to knowing advanced Excel. So if you do advanced Excel, it's probable you can do data analysis, because advanced Excel requires you to know data analysis. That in turn infers that you know analytical skills, because again, you can't do data analysis without analytical skills. And data analysis also links you up to business intelligence because that's a skill. So by creating these types of skill graphs, you are able to, let's say, start getting some understanding in what institutions are teaching, what employers are asking for. But creating the linkage between all of these skills is the actual challenge. So within single taxonomies, you find that this is often done. So this is an example from the ESCO database of the European Commission. And you see that the skill of use spreadsheet software is linked to a whole bunch of different skills that are, let's say, considered equivalent. The thing is, this is only internal within the ESCO taxonomy. So as long as you're using the ESCO taxonomy, you're good. But if you're using any other type of taxonomy, these may not necessarily make sense. So the trick is being able to, let's say, link skills to different taxonomies at once to be able to, let's say, gain this understanding. Where are we in educational systems? I just randomly searched for computational thinking, and this was the first Google result I got. So here's a typical set of learning outcomes that you would find on a course catalog of any university in Europe. What you find here is a nice set of learning outcomes, but these learning outcomes are not linked to anything. They're not linked to any skills. They're not linked to any taxonomies. So if I was to try and make sense of these in an automated way, this would be very, very difficult, because how do I refer this set of skills that has been described here to this graph of data that has been described here if nobody who was preparing this first record has actually taken the trouble to do the linking? Some people will tell you, no problem. Artificial intelligence will come to save us, and artificial intelligence will help us with auto-labeling. Artificial intelligence will help us with natural language processing, and that we don't really need to spend all of this trouble on doing skills. The truth is that AI does help, but the capabilities of AI are often overblown. Matching skills to learning outcomes requires the presence of these taxonomies or ontologies. You can use natural language processing to be able to, let's say, understand and accelerate and suggest skills, but you still need to have taxonomies and ontologies that are in the background. Apart from that, if you're using these natural language processing approaches, there are all kinds of limitations to it. First of all, the natural language processing is prone to all kinds of social biases, and because of the degree of automation can actually serve to increase those biases massively. Secondly, the ontologies which they're based on need to constantly evolve to reflect new skills and changes in terminology. The skills that are required today are not the skills that were required last year. And even the very, very best matching tools need to continually be trained and refined by humans. Remember that every time you see any AI tool on the internet, the AI tool has been trained by tens, hundreds, or even thousands of people working for months or years, manually labeling the data to be able to train the AI. So being able to label skills, being able to match skills, if we want to bring this future out, is pretty much essential. So the challenges linked to skills really are that the large majority of courses are currently not linked to any formal skills classification. Most competence frameworks and skill classifications are also self-standing, and they're not linked to other competence frameworks or other skills classifications. And same thing with occupational standards. Most occupational standards are also not linked to any classification. The last area the EU recommendation tells us to look at is it says that we should support the quality and transparency of micro-credentials by publishing catalogs of micro-credentials, which should include the policy on recognition of micro-credentials by other providers. So publishing catalogs of micro-credentials shouldn't be so difficult. This one probably should be less challenging than the others. So if I do a quick Google search of something really trivial, where can I buy a burger near me? If I just put that into Google, look at the amount of rich data I get. I get a map of the nearest burger joints. I get the ratings of the burger joints. I get their price. I get their address. I can check their live booking to see how many tables are available. I get a tool that unites like 7 or 8 different databases to tell me everything I could possibly want to know about a burger, and probably a lot more I didn't. But let's try that with an educational search now. Where can I study advanced manufacturing? What do I get? I get a bunch of text results. No rich data at all. This is just This is just course data trawled from the internet. I don't get a list of the 10 best institutions to study advanced manufacturing. I don't see the start dates of courses. I get no rich data at all. And to understand why this is the case, it's useful to understand how indexing of courses works, indexing of data works on the internet. So where do web results actually come from? And you may have heard about these tools called spiders. Web search engines run these thing called spiders, and spiders basically crawl the internet and gather information to put into these databases. But very often they will not just crawl a web page directly. They look for something which is called a sitemaps.xml file. And the sitemaps file is essentially a computer-readable file that lets you understand what the data in a website is. So I've just put a little bit of code here. Don't be afraid by it. The important thing is here, you see that it says video title, filling steaks for summer in the example I chose. You see it says video thumbnail. Here's the picture to appear next to the video. You can also see that it has description, it has the cost of the video, etc., etc. And all of this is coded in an XML file. If we look at courses, a standard for this type of data doesn't really exist. So when you publish data in your university course catalog, there's no equivalent for the search engine to come to it and say, now I can understand in a skills graph sense of the word what this course is, and I can use this to, let's say, populate rich data about services. The other approach you can take to this is that you can build your own database of courses. And there are a number of examples of this on the internet. Study Portals is one of the better ones in Europe. And but building a database like this without, let's say, the automated type of sitemaps files means that you need to go through a manual process of manually coding each of these courses, and that tends to be laborious and expensive. And because of this, it also is a service that tends to then be put behind paywalls. If we want to look at recognition data and data on which micro-credentials are recognized, these just plain don't exist at all. There is no data source for them. There's nowhere you can find information about this on the internet. So even course catalogs that link to recognition have some very significant challenges. If you look at it technically, the courses don't have unique identifiers. So I don't even know for sure if a course listed on one website is the same or different than a course listed on another website. Recognition information on micro-credentials is essentially non-existent. And course information, which is published, is currently not really indexable as computer readable data. So moving away from, let's say, the list of problems for a moment, the council recommendation also proposes some technical solutions. And the technical solutions it provides, it talks about the Europass platform, and it says that it should leverage the Europass platform to provide information on learning opportunities, to support authentication of micro-credentials, and to support the portability, stackability, interoperability, exchange, and sharing of information on micro-credentials. So it proposes a path forward. And I'd like to share with you a couple of the examples of what has been done with this path forward. So first and foremost, the European learning model is what you might call the connective tissue for skills and qualifications data in Europe. And the European learning model is a data model which has been in development for the past 2 years, is in, let's say, now an advanced beta, and next March will be released in what's called a version 3, but which is, let's say, the first real public version for European public consumption. And if you look into the principles that went into that data model, the data model is based on a set of core principles. First and foremost, that any data model has to address all levels of education. We can't have silos between primary and secondary, secondary and higher, higher and vet and adult, etc., etc. Learning is learning, and if you're going to build a data model for learning, it should be able to address all learning. Secondly, it needs to be aligned with European recognition instruments, everything from the diploma supplement to the mobility supplement to ECTS to ECVET and the whole alphabet soup of recognition instruments we have created to help do this. Thirdly, if we're saying that learning is learning, then a model that describes learning should be able to capture formal, non-formal, and informal learning. It shouldn't be limited to just one of these. Fourthly, it needs to be applicable to the whole life cycle. And what we mean by this is you shouldn't have one set of data standards to describe a course standard, another set of data standards to describe the curriculum of the course, and yet another set of data standards to describe the credential the student gets as they leave the course, and probably a fourth set to describe the CV they submit to the employer. You need a unitary data model because these are the same information concepts that are being taken from one to the other. The system needs to be interoperable, so it needs to work, let's say, across borders between different technical systems and so on and so forth. And finally, it should be free and open source. And it should be free as in air. You put all this together, and what you see is the need for the emergence of a new meta model for interoperability, a kind of base semantic standard that allows us to communicate in computer readable terms across sectors, systems, and borders in Europe. The European learning model does this through a model that is based on 4 stages. The top stage of this is what we call the European information model, and the information model essentially gathers all the definitions, standards, recommendations, glossaries, and so on and so forth that have been produced to support policy making in Europe. EQF recommendations, set-of glossaries, etc., etc. All of these definitions and concepts that give you a way to describe learning are then abstracted into an ontology, which we call the European data model. And this ontology is essentially a vocabulary of terms which is computer readable. So it doesn't just say this is a learning outcome, it'll say this is a learning outcome, this is the definition of a learning outcome, and this is how you represent a learning outcome in computer readable code, so it can also be understood by a computer system. It adds this third layer of the computer readable next to the human readable. This general vocabulary is then applied in what we call application profiles. And so this vocabulary can be used for different purposes. It can be used to issue credentials to students. It can be used to create curricula. It can be used to create accreditation credentials. It can be used to create student IDs. So all these application profiles give you examples of how to use it in practice. And the bottom layer of the pyramid is extensions, where any country or sector or school can extend the data model based on its own needs. Diving into this a little bit further is that the ontology is based on a set of life cycle concepts. And these life cycle concepts are involved in specifications, which specify what can be learned, what can be done, how it can be assessed, and so on. It's based around learning opportunities, which are things which can be offered, and it's based around credentials. And credentials describe a claim about an individual, something which you have learned or something you have earned. I would like to these generally then abstract into a much wider set of services, and altogether this is being put into an end-to-end credentialing infrastructure that is made up of standards, which may include the Europass learning model, interoperability standards. It includes a set of services, which includes course and qualification search that is offered by the Commission, a set of open source data services, an accreditation database, as well as services that allow you to issue, view, and store credentials. And it's supported by a whole bunch of different software support services. So all the work that is being done by the Commission, let's say, in this area is essentially open sourced and made available to everyone. Two future developments, which I would like to rush through quickly, are first of all, the European system of credentialing is being migrated to something called verifiable credentials. Without diving into it, verifiable credentials are a method standard that allow you to collect all sorts of different information from different providers, everything from your family status to your educational status to your bank account, all in a single wallet. And Europe is developing a wallet for this called the European Citizen Identity Wallet that will be able to store all the information you have collected about yourself in your life and all the statements other organizations have made about you in a single wallet that allows you to really display who you are and link your educational experiences to the rest of your life experiences. The second thing I want to show you that is upcoming is something that is called the Learning Outcome Linking Tool. I was talking about all the challenges that there are in taking unstructured learning outcomes and linking these to skills. And when we look at these, this is actually an AI tool that has been developed that can process learning outcomes and can suggest skills so that you can take the learning outcomes in your courses and link them to skills frameworks. If we look to the future of where we want to go, I would just like to give, let's say, a couple of suggestions of what we would want to think about in the future. And where do we want to go? A report came out last week called Credentials to Employment, the Last Mile. You'll find a link to it here. And this was based on interviews with the biggest HRMS providers, employers, and institutions in the world, and tried to understand what is next in terms of, let's say, a data-driven approach for education. And what the report says is that there are a couple of interesting things coming out. First of all, if you think about lifelong learning as a whole, you can't think of a student only earning credentials in educational institutions. You also need to think about them earning credentials on the job. And if you're going to create a real record of somebody's life skills, you need to be able to start working with employers so that employers can give the type of, let's say, achievement records, which is normal for us to do in education. Secondly, it suggests that the tools of interoperability, so skills frameworks, competence frameworks, etc., need to be used not just by educational institutions or by employers, and they definitely should not have separate systems, but these should unite across sectors. So essentially, the recommendations that come out of the report are that, first of all, we need to add more data on skills and competencies to credentials and to course catalogs. Secondly, if you're building any software system and institution, be it a student information system, be it a learning management system, be it your enterprise resource planning system, you should always focus on technical solutions that provide interoperability. It's not enough to address your own institutional needs. You need to think about how your education links up technically with this graph of information that is going through all systems. Thirdly, we need to pilot more credentials being issued by employers and have more recognition of, let's say, employment credentials in education rather than only vice versa. We need to invest in sectoral competence frameworks, because sectoral competence frameworks really give you, let's say, the base for translating all the skills data. Publishing trust information as linked open data, which is all about all that quality data we were talking about earlier. And finally, we need to create a roadmap for an integrated skills ecosystem. And by this, what we mean is that we need to get employers and educational providers together to be able to actually jointly figure out what skills-based hiring, what skills-based micro-credentials actually means. To conclude, I'd like to remind just of a couple of things. When we talk about interoperability, what we're really talking about is student choice. Interoperability is student choice. It's about answering, how do I as a student identify which skills I need for my life goals? Where's the best place I can actually learn those skills? And where's the best place I can learn it in my particular way of learning? How can I communicate knowledge about my skills to employers or to other educational institutions? And how can I have my skills recognized? Doing this really means focusing on the data. It means making available data in the right formats to be able to create a European interoperability infrastructure. So the thought I would like to leave you with is that if we are talking about a skills-based approach to education, by definition, we're also talking about a data-driven approach to student choice. Thank you for your attention.
For your excellent presentation. And I think from the reaction of the audience, there were really interests among you. So I'm sure that we at least have time for maybe a couple of questions to continue this discussion. Please turn on your microphone when raising question.
Can you hear me? Sorry, can you hear me? Can he hear me? Hello?
Just a moment.
Okay.
We are turning on microphones to you so you could hear.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I don't think so. Oh, nice. Thank you so much for your presentation. I had a question about the concept of micro-credentials. It is very similar to what I've heard about digital badges or e-badges. Could you tell me the difference from these two concepts? Thank you.
So honestly, the concepts are used very, very interchangeably. Strictly speaking, digital badges is a technology standard for, let's say, issuing certificates for micro-credentials, while micro-credentials is a more general term. Honestly, though, most literature you find doesn't make that fine distinction, and yeah, most of the time it's used interchangeably.
Thank you.
Thank you. More questions? Yes, please.
Hello, do you hear me? Yeah, my name is similar to yours. I'm Antanas Mazliauskas. So I have a couple of questions. First question is, when you are speaking about micro-credentials, are you speaking only about university college service providers or also about other service providers who have the right to provide formal or informal educational services? And the second question is, when speaking about quality assurance system, I noticed there is a evaluation of microcredits. Do you speak about internal quality assurance system and internal evaluation, or also it could be part of external quality assurance system and part of external evaluation, like institutions, part of institutional evaluation or something like that? Thank you.
Okay, I think if we look at micro-credentials as a phenomenon, it's really, it's definitely not limited only to higher education. The biggest micro-credential provider in the world, I can't prove this, but is most likely LinkedIn Learning. And they're essentially, let's say, offering small vocational courses of 1 to 12 hours. And I would say that micro-credentials really is about, again, it's about student choice. It's about me saying that I want to mix a university micro-credential with a vet one, with a tiny 1 hour credential from somewhere else. And that, let's say, if it's useful to my development, one is not better than the other. That said, universities are some of the largest and best educational providers on the planet. And let's say micro-credentials, they can probably offer micro-credentials pretty much better than anyone else, providing universities decide to do so. If we look at quality assurance can get complicated very fast. One way to look at it, and if you look at, for example, the microball reports, they indicate this. If you have institutional accreditation, then you're producing micro-credentials, then your institutional accreditation covers the micro-credentials as well. In the end, micro-credentials are not so different from the modules you already offer in institutions. However, if you're not taking an institutional evaluation approach and you're going to look at internal QA of the micro-credentials, then you need to start thinking about what is, let's say, the appropriate, most fit for purpose way to do the internal QA. I'm not sure I have a clear answer to give here, but a lot of the discussion has been around finding the balance between what is the appropriate level of protection for a micro-credential without compromising on the flexibility. So if you're taking a full university program, which a student is going to spend 3 to 5 years of their life following, you have to give that a very, very high level of protection, because it's 3 to 5 years of a person's life, and it's being offered by probably 30 to 50 lecturers. So you also need, let's say, complex collegial approaches to actually checking and forming this. If you're thinking about an individual micro-credential, that might take 20 to 40 hours possibly, then you probably can use a lighter form of quality assurance because the risk to the student is not as large. Also, because it's a much, much tighter topic, you may not need the same level of, let's say, total collegiality in approving or doing it. This isn't to say that you shouldn't have quality assurance, but just to say that there's a very, very big discussion at the moment going on about saying, how do we, let's say, reduce some of the burden of quality assurance without cutting what is essential and allow for this flexibility and speed of response without compromising quality. And probably the emerging model will actually be somewhere in between the, let's say, very, very formal model of QA that's used for degrees and the practically non-existent quality standards that would go into something like LinkedIn Learning. So there's definitely a space for, let's say, a middle ground here, which the discussion is ongoing on.
Thank you, Anthony. And as we also have colleagues who participate online, so maybe if the colleagues who are connected, so please raise the electronic hand so I could see and have a chance to give a question to Anthony. I cannot see any. So maybe using this opportunity of my position today, I'll still also have one question to you. Well, listening to this presentation, I was actually mainly thinking about adult learners. But as you started your presentation with this statement that there is no normal, so do you predict that micro-credentials will also in the near future will be kind of reality in general education schools? So what about early learners? So do you predict this tendency?
Well, for adult learners, I think maybe the only new normal will actually be micro-credentialing learning. So at the beginning of the presentation, I quoted the World Economic Forum, and their employer surveys indicate that 40% of employees are going to need retraining of less than 6 months. So that is literally micro-credentials being deployed at massive scales. In terms of early learners, I would say that, let's say, early learners is a little bit more complex, because for early learners, you do have a certain amount of, let's say, core curriculum that everyone needs to follow. And if we also look at it from a social perspective, there's a reason why the hours of our kindergartens and schools reflect the hours of standard 8 to 4 work. But if you look at it, you would find that actually our kids there were a ton of micro-credentials already. I mean, I have a 4-year-old. I already spend my evenings as a taxi driver going from swimming lesson to dancing lesson to English lesson, etc., etc. How are these not micro-credentials? What I would predict, although this is my own personal guess, we are seeing some mega trends towards more flexibility at the workplace. More and more people are being allowed to work from home a little bit more. I think if that continues and that grows, we might see some increasing flexibility also from our educational institutions. Because I can't find a study that says a kid needs to be in school for 8 hours a day times 5 to succeed in life. And that will probably be also complemented by more flexible educational narratives. So this is already done at school level, where you see charter schools that follow different approaches. I think that you probably will see some more customization, even at this level, even if it's not to the degree of adult education.
Thank you very much, Anthony. So once again, our applause go to you, and thanks for your time for discussion, and it was really extremely interesting. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our second speaker today, and Professor Stefanija Lišauskienė. She is professor from Vytautas Magnus University. She has been working in the field of educational support and in teacher education, in speech therapy and special education. So her research includes special needs, inclusive education, early childhood intervention, and similar areas. So Stefanija today will make the presentation on inclusive teaching, innovative teacher education through personalized learning. And I kindly invite Stefanija, and the floor is yours.
Good morning to everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here and to share with my experiences and some issues and some conclusions from our projects. So as already the chair of the session presented me, I am from the field of education and inclusive education, and I see the system of education as a whole system, as a permanent system, starting from early years to student life, and even teachers as practitioners continue be learners. So I'm going to share with you with my presentation and turning to the inclusive education from the beginning. As most countries in the world follow the international education priority that is emphasized in UN Sustainable Goal, Developmental Goal, particularly for Goal 4. And it sounds that to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning for all. Education for all, for sure, is linked to inclusive education. However, it is still a challenge and not always a realized wish for many people with diverse educational needs. And those learners, those people are already in education, so how to meet their needs. In this presentation, I will focus on the interconnection of inclusive education, diversity of learners, personalized teaching and learning, and personalized learning-based teacher education. Then we are talking about inclusive education. We see that this is like a journey. This is like our vision to reach it, not in one day or one night journey. It's a long way. Anyway, Inclusive education means that we need to respect the diversity of students. And students, from the beginning, they are very diverse. They are having diverse interests, they are having diverse needs, they are from different surroundings and environments, etc. So also, we should ensure different students' learning needs and preferences are met regardless of their backgrounds, abilities, learning styles, etc., or even disability. Also, we need to value each student's individual strengths and contributions and make the learning experience richer and diverse for everyone. The most important and challenging issue is to remove any barriers that prevent students from learning, but this is our vision. Enable all students to take part in learning and fulfill their potential, and enable all students, whatever their circumstances, to enjoy the fullest possible learning experience. So it sounds nicely, it sounds beautiful, but as I already said, it's a long way to reach each of these statements and all of them, but we are on the way. We base our understanding and our model of developing inclusive education on the well-known model of inclusive education. It means Index for Inclusion from Tony Booth and Mel Einskov, where the three parts are constituting the system of inclusive education. It means we need to create inclusive cultures in a school, in a kindergarten, in a higher school, etc. Also involve inclusive practices and produce inclusive policies. I put here to each of these parts some issues they constitute each of them. For example, then we're talking about creating inclusive cultures. It means that we need to build inclusive communities. We need to establish inclusive values that are shared, that are agreed on. And if we start from the beginning, from early years, this process is continuous towards other levels of education and higher education also. We need to think and to develop and produce inclusive policies, developing school for all. School in a wider sense, it means higher education also included, and organize support for diverse learners, for diversity. Learners and teachers also as learners. And last but not least, evolving inclusive practices. It means mobilizing resources and orchestrating learning. According to different scientists, our colleagues, for example, Gibson, he used to say that creating inclusive culture is very difficult and challenging issue because it contains a lot of challenges while we are building communities, while we're creating and sharing values, etc. We may produce inclusive policies. This is not a big challenge. We can do this, and we see from different projects and different countries while sharing those issues that it's on the floor. But the most challenging issue is orchestrating learning, despite the fact that we are implementing inclusive education in our practices. So how to orchestrate the inclusive education, it's a main issue at that time. Changes in education towards more inclusiveness and towards inclusive education, relate to education paradigm change. Implementing changes in the education system towards more inclusivity, the increased focus on a learner is being emphasized, as you see, both on a student and school, student teachers, and already practicing teachers. And of course, it requires improved competences of teachers to be ready to work in rapidly changing school. At any educational level, the ground, as I just mentioned, the ground is shifting away from teacher-centered to learner-centered approach, through which educators increasingly adapt and should adapt, and they do that. They are teaching in accordance with a more complex understanding of human learning. The learning paradigm is consistent with the view that in ever-changing world, the best thing is to teach students how to learn. This issue is of most importance in our schools and even in higher education, while we're working and learning together with our future teachers or student teachers. We put here the short scheme of that personalization leads to successful learning, and we always develop those criteria. But at the same time, we need to respect and to take into consideration the prior knowledge of students, because everyone has those prior knowledges and experiences. Also, there is important student-directed learning. Everyone has a family. They are concerned about that, and family environment and values, talking and taking into account the systemic ecological approach. Peers also. Learning anytime and anywhere, and educators from the beginning, and they are following. They follow each other for many years. Students don't come to the class with empty slates. Even it is early year education setting or higher education. And in this context, concept of funds of knowledge and learners' resources help to frame the concept of personalized learning. These concepts challenge teachers to search for pedagogy and practices to address diversity in their classrooms. So, responsive practices are built on understanding of learner individual differences and inclusion. But again, we need to turn to our classes at school, to our groups and classes in a higher education, in teacher education. We have big groups, so how to know each student, individual student, and how to meet his or her needs. So this is a question for reflection and for our further inquiry. In order to shift to learning paradigm, teachers need to base their teaching and learning on relevant theoretical approach. So in the image, you can see there, the four perspectives of learning based upon theoretical principles are shown. So, and next to each part, instructional methods associated with each adjacent to respective quadrant. And green color quadrats represent a learner-focused learning approach, and rows teacher-focused approaches. So in order to know where we are and what we are going to implement, we need to apply to the theoretical approaches. For example, while we are talking about and implementing inclusive education, and we need, and learning, following learning paradigm, the constructivism that focuses on that learner builds on personal experience, internal and active and social issues in learning process. We can check which and what methods we can use, and which method can support to focus on learner in their education, and etc. All these parts, all these approaches suggest some methods we can use, or sometimes we can combine. It depends on the needs, on the situation in the classroom, the situation and a project we are implementing with our learner. And we need to be flexible in that, but knowing the main priorities in our education. Shift from teaching to learning paradigm demands a new generation of aspiring teachers. So why we are turning to teacher education, and to aspiring teachers who are themselves self-directed learners. Teacher education programs need to facilitate student teachers, or future teachers, to understand and experience the transformative impact of personalized learning, so that they in turn can help future students to be confident, reflective, and autonomous learners. So in order to implement all those issues in a school, students, they should undergo all these steps by themselves and have this kind of experience. Personalized learning, teaching and learning guides the whole education system to the learner, and changes in one's role, moving from learner as a user to collaborating partner, and creating unique learning path. Every day, working with our students, future teachers, we experience those issues, and we are going towards this model. We are using it, but I should say there is a challenging way to do that. Anyway, personalization focuses on the strengths, needs, and interests of each learner. We should do focus on that, because it creates opportunities for them, for learners, to choose what, how, where, and when to study, and how to use their learning in a constantly changing learning environment. It invites students into depth learning process. It enables them to acquire learning experience. Even they need to overcome and cope with a lot of challenges. It ensures better learning outcomes, because those are their own internalized learning and outcomes. Personalized learning aims to increase students' agency and empowerment over their own learning at every level, according to Freire, which I love very much. This is my theoretical friend, I should say. To implement this aim, we need to have good knowledge of the individual learner. It requires shared student and teacher responsibility for learning. Also learner involvement, linking to individual experience, aspirations, and motivations, motivation to acquire new knowledge and new skills and new experiences in a changing and sometimes turbulent environments. It requires collaboration, participation, involvement in the learning process. Learning is not a simple process. It is a complex and messy process related to a number of factors. It does not take place directly from one point to another. Learners must have possibilities to learn concepts, of course, to construct their knowledge and understanding, but mainly in collaboration with others. Dialogue and co-construction turn into crucial elements of personalized learning. Personalized learning is closely related to teaching, to personalized teaching. Personalized based teaching and teacher education is seen as a constantly developing learners and teachers' journey in learning environment through learning communities, through communities of practice, employing universal design for learning, and through reflective practice. As we implemented the project, we call it INTERPEARL, Innovative Teacher Education Through Personalized Learning, in an international group of university teachers and students also. We developed the model, the core elements of personalized learning, and we put in the center learner and teacher journey. And the first element is collaborative dialogue. That is very important in this journey. Co-construction of our knowledge, personal reflection, and mutual ownership by learners and teachers. Also, we developed another issue in our process of learning from each other and discussions that the teachers as colleagues and also students. Flexible content, tools, and learning environments to facilitate learners' interests and needs and teacher-learner collaboration is also of most importance in this process. The next is targeted support in response to learners' interests and needs through learning communities and communities of reflective practice. And data-driven reflection, decision-making, and continuous improvement, drawing on self-evaluation and feedback to inform next steps in learning and teaching. In this model, after our discussions and co-constructing these processes together with colleagues and students, as also colleagues, even inviting our teachers, practitioners already working not only in the university but in a practice of inclusive schools, because all schools they are trying to develop and to implement inclusive education. So we put 4 most important elements here. Person, it means learner and teacher, focusing on identity, diversity and inclusion, knowledge as students as learners, learner agency, learner autonomy, and joint responsibility for goals and outcomes. Also, we focus on environment. It means on learning spaces, on individual work, group work, display, presentations, and celebration of learning. This is like conclusion issues. And practice and process, practice building relationships, learning communities, communities of practice, and reflective practitioners. That for teachers, those all issues are very important, no doubt. And process, skillful interactions, co-creation, authentic contexts, systematic inquiry, flexibility and support, and scaffolding, connecting learning, assessment, and reflection again. So, here I just wanted to show the scheme again, how to personalize teaching and learning in order to ensure your teaching provides opportunities for diverse students. So we're having diversity of students and teachers. It means diversity of personalities, interests, learning profile, affect, etc. We have diversity of students' readiness to study, readiness to accept, readiness to be together and to learn together, diverse levels of their preparedness. So we need to have diversity of curriculum then. And we are focusing on diversity content, what they should learn, diversity of learning outcomes, what they at the end should put on the table or know or be competent to do. And of course, diversity of learning process as permanent, as continuous process, as lifelong learning process. So, how to personalize teaching and learning? We can use, as I already mentioned, universal design for learning, but shortly I just wanted to repeat, if we focusing on and taking this personalized learning concept, so how to personalize learning then, taking this concept as a base? How, what, when, where, why, etc. So we need to have and to focus on multiple options, how they are learning, or multiple content density levels, etc. Multiple time and constraint and options, as already it was mentioned that our students are not the same, they are not usual, we should say students, they're not the same as 10 years ago. They're having families, they're having jobs, even in teacher education. So those issues are most important to be at university, to study, to learn, and afterwards to gain their competences. Multiple location options. They can study and they can learn in a cooperative or service-based learning. We should say they can learn in different environments, in NGOs, in schools, etc. And of course in auditorium, online, etc. And they should have multiple perspectives and motivation. What we need to think, what motivates students to be at university and to learn, what can support them and inspire. And also, I just sharing the other personalized learning approaches we are using while we are focusing on person, environment, process, and practice. It means collaborative learning, scenario-based learning, problem-based learning, inquiry-based learning, peer learning, project-based learning, case studies, etc. We can put much more for sure from our all experiences here. And at the end, I would like to share some reflections from our project. As we started to implement personalized learning in project partners universities. And we checked, we tested the teachers and students' approaches before we started the project, what they used to say and how they see their contribution as learners to the study program, to cooperation with teachers and from teacher and student positions. So, and afterwards, then we developed this model of personalized learning together with students, and they felt a little ownership of this, and contribution to this program. So, and you see the citations, and I just wanted to say that as the involvement of students in planning and improvement of study subject increases, the role of students a little bit changes, and we saw it in our project. It means transitions from episodic partner in their learning process to an independent decision maker. But we can see here two citations from, I just selected some, from university teacher who is working in a teacher education program. They used to say that the role of students in planning and improving their studies is quite important. Students choose what they will need in the future. For example, they can choose to attend qualitative or quantitative research methodology workshops, depending on which method they will use it in their thesis. And students choose both the topics and methods of assessment. If one of the methods of assessment is presentation, it is assessed not only by the lecturer, but also by the group and the student oneself according to certain criteria. It means that we are slightly starting with the small steps, but this is still not a personalized learning in a full picture. But anyway, we are starting to work together with the students in order they feel they are contributing to their learning process. And also, students' view on this. However, teachers rarely assign students the role of an independent decision maker. And in students' words, sometimes teachers ask our opinion about the assessment of the subject at the end. But some students already said, I am fully responsible for my results. And no role, no matter for how many years there have been complaints, nothing is taken into account here. So we see that still students' opinions and their reflections on their learning process is different, but this is normal. We are different learners and different human beings. So, and at the end, I should say that despite the fact that the shift to personalized learning in higher education is basically an advanced process, the challenges are evident. In every university, we worked together. Implementing personalized learning in shallow ways of increasing students' choice, where, what, how, etc., to learn without increasing student agency can increase student disengagement and result in lower achievements. So there is a danger to move to another side of the river. Personalization cannot be implemented into higher study programs in its full scope at the moment, as this would mean tailoring the overall learning content to the needs of individual student. Hence, departing from the general vision of the study program, its objectives and foreseeable outcomes. Still, teachers and students follow clear instructions as the traditional model, and that is still supported by policy and practice at national levels and at university levels. So we can, find small niches where we can implement personalized learning, but still we have kind of traditional model, and Moreover, accreditation of study programs may limit flexibility of studies. So I am leaving you without any conclusion because I don't know how to conclude. Sorry for that. I just moved away, but actually I said what I wanted to say. But I think it's time for reflection. Maybe not now, but especially those who are working in teacher education or even in higher education or in secondary education. We should reflect and we should share with each other how to implement personalized learning concept while we are living in rapidly changing environments, countries, contexts, schools, etc. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Stefania, for your enriching presentation. And now we have the time for questions. Yes, please turn on your microphone.
Is that? Okay, thank you for your excellent presentation. I'm Professor Dalila Naimi from National Higher School of Biotechnology in Algeria. I have just a question, simple question. You consider the diversity in your slides, and I would like to know how do you consider this diversity in the evaluation process? Do you make it, or it depends of another program, for example? If you tell us more about. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. This issue is very challenging, and you just focused on these issues right now. So evaluation and assessment is very sensitive for us, but for sure we use different tools for assessment. So self-assessment and peer assessment and different, while they're evaluating different projects, different group, each other projects, and teacher assessment, it's kind of, cumulative way of assessing. So, but diversity in evaluation and in grades, still it exists.
Thank you.
Yes, more questions? Okay, online question. Unfortunately, I cannot see it on the screen somehow. Just a moment. Yes, please, Mali.
Okay. Thank you very much. I enjoyed very much to listen to your terrific lecture. I remember those days we were in Kovna, practicing tools with teachers and with you, dealing with values and giving teachers tools in order to transform them from a teacher of knowledge to a teacher of coaching. A teacher as a coach also was a course in Vilnius University. So we got the opportunity not only to realize that we should be more specific with our students, and in order to get those tools in order to get those tools, we have to change the mind of teachers and to give them tools in order to help them to have an effective dialogue with each student and with his parents. and according, as you said, the environment that he faced, the disabilities, you know, the learning disabilities, attention disorder disabilities, and etc., and to give each of them the way to succeed. You know, I'm the CEO of Nitzan, the Israeli Association for Children and Adults for Learning Disabilities and ADHD, and actually the name Nitzan is that what we are doing in Israel for those students that they can flouriship. And nowadays we are coming to school and we are giving teachers those best practice on the job training. So I think that this is, for example, how Vilnius University adapt a course that gives best practice with teachers, and I think that we are all the time we are looking for best practice in order to integrate all those students, and I think that after the COVID-19, we put a lot focus on the emotional, the emotional and the social aspects that should be combined with learning. Otherwise, we lose students, and I would like to speak with you more and more and more, and I hope that we have a chance to speak with each other and to share our experience and to learn from you. Thank you. So I want also to ask how you deal with social emotional aspect. According to the inclusive learning at school, so how you combine it with learning, how you do it. I know that you do it.
Thank you, dear Mali, for your reflection and a question. I don't know if it is a right time to answer and to go deeper to diverse needs and how we are going to meet them. But what I wanted to reflect on your saying that we cannot, change the mind of teachers, immediately. And thank you for this issue, to raising up this issue. We need to co-construct our teaching, our understanding, and this is a mutual work in cooperation with others. As we base our understanding on social constructivism and social construction is a good way to work together and to come together to this issue. So then we can find and create and share in community of practice, and as learning is a main issue in a community of practice, how to work with diverse needs of our students. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Mali. And thank you for your nice reflection. And I feel that all these nice things were said not to Vilnius University, but to Vytautas Magnus University. Am I correct?
Sorry. Vytautas Magnus University. Yeah. I take my words. And of course, we had together an international conference, which was a big success. So Vytautas Magnus, yes, University. Thank you.
Just as we also have our campus in Vilnius, so Mali, that's it. We have one question from the audience to Professor Stefania.
Yes, thank you so much for your fantastic lecture. My name is Javier Sánchez from Alicante University in Spain. And in a way, I suppose, like everybody here in the audience, we would like to stretch more your thoughts, how you finished, that we need to reflect. And well, we are going to continue reflecting this afternoon, but I think that your lecture has put the level so high, I mean, looking for excellence in that personalized learning, that it can create frustration. You know, when some teachers will say, yes, that will be a utopia, but how to reach that? No? Then I think that we need to finish. Please don't close the door. We don't go out until you give us some lights, you know, to continue, you know, not to finish in that way. I mean, I am convinced that the only way of getting this high standard of education, personalized education, the only way is not to be elitist, is to be through collaboration between all of us. That is what I would add.
Thank you so much for your reflection, I should say, not a question, but I don't know how to answer and what to say, but I would like just to stress that on this very simple issue, that we don't need to reach personalized learning, you know, and teaching in one day, just immediately. This is a process. This is a process, and the process should be, how to say, we should satisfy the process. And always we need to think that nobody can, put power on us as learners, even if it is a teacher or student. So we're talking about teacher agency, we're talking about learner agency, and how to work together, how to cooperate, how to take responsibility and to share this responsibility. This is very important issue, but if we are starting one day, step by step, we see the result. This is sometimes we are starting from a big mess. As I proposed my students, I don't know if I have some time to talk, but you can, using universal design for learning, you know, we are having a lecture, we are having a topic, and I proposed, please do the assignment, a task, you know, as you wish, if it is a project or scheme or narrative, etc. And from the beginning, some years ago, my students were sitting and, you know, looking to me, and they said, but you are a teacher, you should say. But I said, no, we are all learners, and I would like to learn from you also. Please do in different ways, and please choose your way. You are, you know, you feel best in, or strong in that. And they did excellent, but from the beginning, they were stressed, you know? I don't know if I answered to your question.
Thank you so much for the question and also for the answer. And we still have a few minutes for one more question.
Well, thank you. My name is Mohamed Mehdi from Algeria. Thank you for the nice presentation. In this vision, the student will play the important and central role. And I would like to know if there is a difference between this new vision and the techniques and the methods used in North America.
Actually, as we are working with the partners mainly in Europe, so I should be just, you know, open and say, I don't know exactly what the advantages are in North America. So sorry for that.
Okay. I see that Mali's hand is still raised. Is it? Yes, it's technical. Yeah, point. So thank you very much. And Mali, we cannot hear you.
You cannot hear me. Why?
Now we hear you.
Okay. I want to say that what Stefania taught us in this lecture is in general. This is the orientation all over the world, also in North America, and we have connection with schools and with districts in the US, in America. I think that this is the orientation. This is the if I may say, the trend. This is the way, maybe the only way for inclusive teaching and learning everywhere. It's depend whether you are you have the passion as a school principal, as a teacher, so you do not need somebody to tell you to do this, because otherwise you lose a student at class, because you should be focused on the individual and focus on his difficulties, whether they are academic, social, or emotional. So thank you very much again, Stefania. You are very modest.
Thank you, Mali. Greetings to Israel. And well, I think really this is very interesting presentation, and probably we can continue our discussions already during our coffee break. We will have the coffee break till 11:30 at the University Cafe. So you take this time, take this opportunity to address Stefania, and I'm sure that we can also maybe discuss about possible transformations of our study programs, so we could really work and apply these principles of personalized learning. Thank you so much here participating. See you all after the break.